Hi guys, welcome back to the channel. Hope you're all doing really well. Today I'm reading you my latest essay, What Big Tech Won't Tell You About AI and Surveillance. This series is my attempt to unpack what's really happening in AI, why the cloud model is breaking down, and where I believe intelligence is actually heading next. It's a long essay. I'm going to try and do it all in one go. So there's probably going to be a few ums, ahs, and mistakes, so bear with me. And I might occasionally just have to pause for a drink. So let's dive in. It's broken down into 4 parts. This is part 1, and I won't. I've started. I was reading the summary and the executive summary and the key points before, but I'll leave that for the written article. I'm going to dive straight into it. So obviously you can catch those on the written article itself. So this is chapter 1. So the blog is, again, What Big Tech Won't Tell You About AI and Surveillance. Chapter 1, the evolution of surveillance. Okay, let's dive into it. We tend to imagine surveillance as something dramatic, a dark room full of blinking monitors, intelligence officers in headsets, agents in vans are listening to conversations through hidden microphones. That version makes for good cinema, but it distracts from the real story. The real story is much quieter, much slower, much more ordinary. Surveillance didn't break down the door and declare itself. It walked in politely. It upgraded your phone. It improved your email. It personalized your newsfeed. It enhanced your online experience. And as it evolved, it became so normal, so ambient, so woven into everyday life that many people stopped noticing it altogether. This is the story of how that happened, and why AI is the most profound shift yet. Phase 1, when surveillance began with messages. If you lived through the early 2000s, you probably remember the feeling. Mobile phones were still exciting, texting was new and affordable, and being reachable became part of modern life. Behind the scenes, something else was happening, quietly, invisibly, and without public debate. Telecommunication providers were capturing everything they could think of: who you called, how long you spoke, which tower you connected to, who you texted, when and where you moved. They didn't need to read your messages. Metadata was enough to map your life with alarming accuracy. It could reveal your relationships, your routines, your stress, your travel plans, your social world. It could predict your behavior better than your friends could. To governments, this was a revelation. To intelligence agencies, it was a gift. Surveillance didn't require listening in on or planting of bugs. All it required was access to the infrastructure. There was no big debate about this, no collective awareness. It arrived as a side effect of progress, and progress is easy to accept when it's wrapped in convenience. This stage didn't feel like surveillance. It felt like modern life. Phase 2. Social media turns surveillance into behavioural data. The next shift came with the rise of platforms that asked us to share details voluntarily. At first, it seemed harmless. Post a photo here, like a comment there, update your status when something funny happens. It felt intimate and social, a way to stay connected. What people didn't anticipate was that these interactions would become the raw material for the world's most powerful behavioural models. Social platforms realised that your digital crumbs were incredibly valuable. How long your eyes lingered on an image, what made you pause, what topics made you angry, when you were lonely, who influenced you, where your attention drifted, how predictable your mood was. It was no longer about who you contacted, but how you behaved. It wasn't metadata anymore, it was behavioural data. This was the era when surveillance became participatory. We weren't just monitored, we were generating the monitoring voluntarily. And because the experience felt enjoyable, social, fun, personalised, most people didn't see a problem. Behavioural surveillance didn't feel like surveillance. It felt like recommendations. It felt like connection. It felt like the internet knowing you. But something subtle had already shifted. You were no longer the user. You had become the product. Phase 3. AI moves surveillance from behaviour to the mind. AI takes surveillance to its deepest level yet, not because it sees more, because it understands more. AI doesn't just record what you click or what you type, it interprets what you mean. It can, it can detect when you're sad, when you're anxious, when your confidence drops, when you're hedging, when you're hiding something, when you're lonely, when you're stressed, when you're trying to impress someone, when you're spiraling, when you're masking. It can map your emotional patterns, moral worldview, political intuitions, conflict style, relational needs, cognitive blind spots. And the frightening thing is this: you don't have to say any of these things directly. Inference is the engine. The model reads between the lines. 2 decades ago, surveillance was about metadata. 1 decade ago, surveillance was about behavior. Today, surveillance is about psychology. AI gives companies and governments something that was previously impossible: a window into the mind, and it harvests that insight at scale. Phase 4. The surveillance state quietly expands. As surveillance capabilities deepened, governments worldwide began to realize that the infrastructure created by tech companies was too valuable to ignore. In the last 5 years alone, we've seen encrypted systems pressured for backdoors, messaging apps targeted for refusing cooperation, mandates for on-device scanning, proposals for unified digital IDs, sweeping new online safety laws, demands for AI model monitoring and reporting, pressure on cloud providers to enable lawful access. The founder of Telegram was arrested in France and asked to provide a backdoor that would compromise hundreds of millions of private conversations. He refused. The EU continues to push for client-side scanning, essentially forcing your device to report you to authorities before you've even hit send. The UK is pushing for digital identities tied to online behaviour, creating a bridge between anonymous digital life and state databases. Australia attempted to pass legislation that would force companies to weaken encryption upon request. And everywhere, silently, the alliance between cloud infrastructure and state power grows stronger. Not because of conspiracy, but because of incentives. To a government, visibility is stability. To a regulator, visibility is compliance. To law enforcement, visibility is threat reduction. To security agencies, visibility is intelligence. To politicians, visibility is control. And history shows something painfully consistent. Every surveillance tool ever built will eventually be used for purposes it wasn't originally intended for. The people who build the tools rarely abuse them. The people who inherit them eventually do. This isn't pessimism, it's historical pattern. Surveillance infrastructure always outlives the good intentions that built it. The spiral, why each era made the next one inevitable. If you look closely, the 4 eras aren't isolated chapters, they're stepping stones. Metadata made behavioural tracking possible. Behavioural tracking made psychological inference possible. Psychological inference made government interest inevitable. Government interest made infrastructure consolidation predictable. Infrastructure consolidation makes autonomy difficult. Reduced autonomy makes centralization feel normal. Step by step, the world drifted into a model where everything is recorded, everything is analyzed, everything is interpreted, everything is stored somewhere you can't see. Everything is accessible to someone you don't know. Everything is becoming part of a larger system that nobody voted for, but everyone participates in. And the irony is, no single actor engineered this outcome. It emerged from convenience, incentives, technical limitations, regulatory pressures, public indifference, moral outsourcing to corporations, cultural dependence on digital systems. This is how surveillance evolves in the real world, not through oppression, through infrastructure, not through force, through convenience, and not through fear, through apathy. Why this matters now. For this first time in history, we're on the verge of a technology that understands the human mind at scale, predicts human behavior with precision, classifies emotional states instantly, extrapolates worldview and identity. refines its models based on billions of interactions, integrates into every digital environment, shapes opinions, decisions, relationships, and learns from everything it sees. And this intelligence is being centralized, run on servers owned by companies with incentives you cannot align with, accessible by governments with powers you cannot vote against, and governed by systems you cannot inspect. The stakes have never been higher. This is not about dystopia. This is about direction. This is about drift. This is about whether humanity will wake up before the architecture solidifies. The next chapter of surveillance isn't coming. It's here. And the question is no longer, how do we stop surveillance? But what kind of intelligence do we want to live with? So that was part 1. This is part 2. AI inference and the emergence of behavioural signatures. You've probably heard the phrase, AI models don't need your identity, they learn from your behaviour. This sounds simple, almost harmless, like a technical detail, but it understates something profound. Behaviour isn't just a pattern, it's a signature. When you interact with an AI system, you reveal more than information, you reveal yourself. Your thought processes, your emotional landscape, your biases, your worldview, your insecurities, your relationship instincts, your habits of mind, your vulnerabilities. We've never had technology capable of perceiving these things before. Certainly not at scale, certainly not instantly, and certainly not in a way that improves itself by studying millions of similar patterns across billions of data points. AI represents a new category of surveillance, not because it sees more, but because it understands more. Inference, the unspoken engine behind modern surveillance. Most people still think AI systems collect data in the same way apps used to collect browsing history or location metadata. That's the old paradigm. That's surveillance 1.0. Surveillance 2.0 was behavioural profiling, what social media pioneered, tracking friction, attention, emotional triggers, sentiment, polarity, outrage loops. But AI introduces surveillance 3.0, psychological inference. Instead of asking, what did this person do? AI asks, why did they do it? What does this reveal about who they are? What will they think next? How will they behave under pressure? What are they afraid of? What persuades them? What weakens their resolve? What makes them feel safe? No previous surveillance system was capable of that level of interpretation. Metadata shows patterns. Behavior reveals preferences. But inference reveals character. This is the leap. This is the part so many people have not yet grasped. This is why AI changes everything. And unlike metadata or behavioral data, inference cannot be turned off. It emerges naturally from the statistical machinery of large language models. You cannot use a system that understands patterns without generating an understanding of the mind that created them. Inference is unavoidable, and that makes it dangerous. The psychology hidden in your sentences. If you want to understand the true depth of AI inference, consider what can be deducted from something as simple as a paragraph of text. Not the content, the shape of it. Punctuation is emotional. Periods suggest certainty. Ellipses suggest hesitation. Exclamation points reveal excitement or insecurity. Dashes show digressions, scattered thinking, or rhetorical intention. Vocabulary is identity. You can tell someone's socioeconomic background, education, religion, and cultural influences from their word choices. Sentence rhyme is psychological. Short sentences show decisiveness or anxiety. Long, winding ones often reveal contemplation, abstraction, or avoidance. Hedges reveal self-protection. I might be wrong, but maybe it's just me. These reveal fear of judgment. Directness or indirectness reveals conflict style. Formality reveals social defensiveness. Tense reveals trauma. People who have experienced acute trauma often mix present and past tense unconsciously. Self-reference reveals ego conditions. I think versus it seems versus one could argue. AI doesn't need sophisticated emotional intelligence. Their patterns reveal themselves. Humans are creatures of rhyme, tone, hesitation, flourish, prioritization, avoidance, cadence. AI sees all of this. It quantifies what humans intuitively sense. And once quantified, it becomes predictable. This is no longer data surveillance. This is mind surveillance. Linguistic fingerprints. Why anonymity no longer exists. There's a common misconception that privacy comes from removing your name, email, or identifiable metadata. In the era of AI, this is laughably insufficient. Your behavior is your identity. Your writing is your fingerprint. Your thinking patterns are as unique as DNA. Even if you strip away your name, your location, device ID, IP address, account details, the model still knows who you are. It knows because nobody else speaks, reacts, hesitates, structures thought, or processes complexity exactly like you do. This is behavioral biometrics in disguise. Except you don't have to opt in, and you can't opt out. You can change your name, you can hide your IP, you can use a VPN, you can spoof a device, you can mask your location, but you cannot change the deep cognitive patterns that form your linguistic fingerprint. Your mind writes for you. AI learns from it, which means anonymity, real anonymity, is now extraordinarily difficult. Why I have nothing to hide collapses completely. I have nothing to hide was always a flawed argument, but in the era of AI, it becomes absurd. People imagine privacy violations are about hiding crimes, secrets, affairs, or shameful behaviors. But AI surveillance isn't about secrets. It's about predictability. AI wants to know what kind of person are you, what persuades you, what destabilizes you, what motivates you, what depresses you, what encourages you, what frightens you, what do you desire, what do you avoid, what biases guide your decisions, what cognitive shortcuts do you rely on. These insights are not hidden, they're unconscious. AI doesn't need to expose your secrets, it exposes your psychology. And you can't hide what you don't know you're revealing. Inference doesn't need truth, only probability. Here's where the danger intensifies. AI doesn't need to correctly understand you. It only needs to produce high probability interpretations. And in high-scale environments, law enforcement, health systems, social platforms, governments, probability becomes policy. If an AI system decides there's an 80% chance you're anxious, that classification will follow you. If it decides there's a 70% chance you lean politically in a certain direction, that may affect what you're shown. If it decides your language signals a tendency towards depression or instability, that can influence risk models or interventions. If it infers a cognitive vulnerability, that becomes a lever for persuasion, for marketing, for manipulation. But here's the crucial part. AI inference does not require truth. It only requires confidence. Surveillance becomes probabilistic. Profiling becomes ambient. Classification becomes automated. And because it's invisible, you cannot challenge it, correct it, or even know it exists. A world shaped by invisible psychological inference is more dangerous than a world shaped by visible surveillance. Because visible surveillance frightens people, invisible surveillance sedates them. Why AI knows you better than you know yourself. There's a deeply uncomfortable idea emerging in cognitive science and machine learning. AI is getting better at predicting certain human behaviors than humans themselves. Not because AI is sentient, it isn't, but because humans forget their own behavior, misunderstand their own motivations, mispredict their own decisions, overlook their own biases, rationalize after the fact. AI doesn't do any of this. It simply measures patterns and extrapolates. It sees how you soften your tone when seeking validation, how you structure thoughts when you're tired, how your vocabulary shrinks under stress, how your punctuation changes when you're hiding something, how your emotional arc shifts throughout a conversation. AI's understanding of you isn't emotional, it's statistical. That makes it cold, objective, and brutally accurate. We've entered a world where AI can map your mind without you ever knowing your mind was mapped. No other surveillance system in human history has come close to this. Not CCTV, not phone monitoring, not email scanning, not social media profiling. This is surveillance of the psyche. From data extraction to behavioural extraction to mind extraction. The evolution of surveillance can now be framed like this. Data extraction. What did you do? Website to cookies to metadata to browsing history. Behavioural extraction. Why did you do it? Social platforms to clicks to sentiment to emotional triggers. Mind extraction. What does this reveal about who you are? AI to inference to prediction to classification to psychological modelling. Data tells a story. Behaviour tells a pattern. But AI tells a person. This is the step change. This is the part that transforms surveillance from something external into something internal. Why mind extraction is more dangerous than any data leak. People worry about data breaches, and they should. Leaked emails, leaked phone numbers, leaked photos, all catastrophic. But a leaked psychological model, a leaked behavioural fingerprint, a leaked set of emotional triggers and vulnerabilities, that is an entirely different category of risk. Your mind cannot be reissued. Your thinking patterns cannot be replaced. Your psychological vulnerabilities cannot be revoked like a password. Once someone understands how to manipulate your behaviour, you cannot ungive them that knowledge. This is why AI inference is more dangerous than data collection. It isn't a snapshot, it's a map of how you think, a map of what moves you, a map of what predicts you. AI doesn't need your secrets, it needs your tendencies. That's enough to influence behaviour at scale. The invisible feedback loop. You train the AI that learns how to influence you. Here is a feedback loop almost nobody is discussing. You speak to AI. AI infers your psychology. Your psychology helps train future AI systems. Future AI systems become better at understanding people like you. Those systems shape your recommendations, interventions, nudges. You interact with those nudges. Your reactions produce more psychologically useful data. The cycle intensifies. It is self-reinforcing, self-improving, and self-accelerating. And because the loop feels helpful, the model improves. The responses get better. Everything feels smarter. Nobody notices that they are training the intelligence that will one day be used to predict, classify, and potentially manipulate them. This is not a conspiracy. This is a structural feedback loop built into the architecture of AI. The system gets better at understanding humans because humans train it to understand them. And once it understands us, it becomes incredibly easy for the system to influence us. Not through force, through helpfulness. This is the quiet power of inference-based AI. And this is why sovereign AI becomes essential. Because the only way to break the feedback loop is to keep the intelligence and the data that fuels it on the device, with you, not above you, not against you, not behind you, not on a server run by someone whose incentives you cannot control. This is what sets the stage for part 3. Part 3. The surveillance state and the illusion of sovereignty. No matter how advanced technologies become, no matter how loudly companies insist on their values, and no matter how comforting the marketing language sounds, one law remains constant throughout history. Power always seeks visibility, and tools that enable visibility are always eventually used. Surveillance is not an aberration. It is the natural gravitational pull of any state, democratic or authoritarian, once the infrastructure exists to make it possible. Governments say they want safety, compliance, trustability, reduced harm, prevention of crime, and protection of citizens. These are legitimate priorities. Every society needs them. But the path to these goals often becomes inseparable from the desire for informational control. And the last 20 years of digital technology have delivered something governments could only dream of: a vast privately built surveillance infrastructure maintained by corporations, centralized in data centers, and integrated into almost every area of modern life. This is where the story shifts from technological evolution to political inevitability. The state discovers the power of digital visibility. When the NSA leaks emerged, people were shocked to learn how much communication metadata was being collected. But the truth is, intelligence agencies had been experimenting with large-scale digital monitoring long before the public ever became aware of it. The first phase of the modern surveillance state wasn't about reading messages. It was about mapping networks. Terrorism, organised crime, geopolitical competition, these pressures incentivized governments to build tools that could see at scale. But then something unexpected happened. Corporation built tools that could see even more. Platforms like Facebook, Google, Instagram, TikTok, they harvested behavioural data far more intimate than any government had access to, and they did it with public consent. To governments, this wasn't a threat, it was an opportunity. The state rarely innovates surveillance, it adopts it. It harnesses what the private sector builds. As soon as these technologies existed, the state's relationship with them became inevitable. Law enforcement requested access. Intelligence agencies studied them. Regulators sought oversight. Politicians realized they were powerful tools. Courts granted orders for data access. Constitutions were stretched to accommodate new norms. And now, with AI, the state sees something even more valuable: a technology that can understand human behavior, emotion, intention, and psychology at scale. That's why the pressure for control is accelerating. Why governments always push for backdoors, even if it breaks the system. The desire for surveillance is not driven primarily by malice. Most government officials are not villains. They are bureaucrats, lawyers, analysts, and administrators trying to do their job. Their job is to reduce risk. And from the perspective of a government, risk is everywhere. Terrorism, organised crime, misinformation, political extremism, cyber attacks, foreign influence, threats to public order, new technologies they don't fully understand. To them, visibility equals safety. But here is the paradox. Visibility is the enemy of privacy, and privacy is the foundation of freedom. Governments see encrypted systems as blind spots, so they try to regulate them. They ask for exceptional access, but exceptional access is still access. They ask for backdoors, but backdoors for good guys are still vulnerabilities. They ask for client-side scanning, but that turns every device into a potential surveillance node. Even in a democratic nation, the logic of surveillance follows the same path. We need this for safety. We will only use it in emergencies. We need it to be permanent to ensure consistent safety. We need to expand the definition of safety. Now it applies to everything. This is how powers granted to governments, even temporarily, always expand. Not because of evil intent, but because the incentives demand it. Telegram, France, and the reality of state pressure. The recent arrest of Telegram's founder in France is not an anomaly, it is a preview. He was pressured to grant access to private messages. He refused. People interpret this as a triumph of privacy. It was. But it also revealed something else, something important. If governments cannot compel a backdoor through legislation, they will try to compel it through pressure. Not overtly, not dramatically, but through legal maneuvers, jurisdictional exploitation, and political leverage. A system that relies on trusting someone to resist pressure is not a sovereign system, because pressure evolves, people change, regimes change, public sentiment changes, interpretations of the law change. Sovereignty that depends on the courage of a founder is not sovereignty, it is faith, and faith is not a defence. The EU's push for client-side scanning. Client-side scanning is one of the most quietly dangerous ideas circulating today. On the surface, it sounds reasonable. What if your device checks for harmful content before sending it? But in practice, this means your phone becomes a surveillance tool. Your private photos are scanned. Your private messages are analysed. Your device acts as an extension of state monitoring. Your autonomy is replaced with automated compliance. And because it happens before encryption, the system never needs to break encryption. It simply bypasses it. Client-side scanning turns every smartphone into a soft police officer, working silently, automatically, and without probable cause. You don't see what it detects. You don't know how it classifies. You don't know who receives the alert. You cannot appeal the scanning process. You cannot refuse it without opting out of the entire ecosystem. This is the future the EU is inching towards, a future where your device monitors you more closely than any institution ever could. Not because of authoritarianism, but because of administrative logic. This is how surveillance evolves, incrementally, bureaucratically, invisibly. The UK's digital ID push, the infrastructure of control. Digital identity systems are often framed as modernisation, streamlined services, convenience, unified access. But digital ID systems also create a direct link between online behaviour and state records, a persistent identifier that follows you across platforms, an easy mechanism for blacklisting or restrictions, a single point of failure for democracy, a foundation for compliance-based citizenship. Once digital ID becomes mandatory for central services, privacy becomes conditional. And conditional privacy is not privacy, it is permission. Digital ID is not inherently bad, but digital ID combined with centralized AI is extraordinarily dangerous. It creates the infrastructure for automated compliance, a system where algorithms, not humans, decide if your behavior aligns with policy. No democracy is immune from the drift towards control once the tools to enforce control exist. Why surveillance tools always outlive their creators? One of the most important ideas in political history is this. No government in history has ever voluntarily given up surveillance capability once it was acquired. Not one. Every surveillance tool follows the same life cycle. Justified by crisis, adopted reluctantly, expanded administratively, normalized culturally, inherited politically, abused eventually. The people who lobby for surveillance often believe they are protecting society. The people who inherit the tools often see them as opportunities. This is why sovereignty must be architectural, not ideological. If a system requires trusting good leaders, it is not sovereign. If a system can be reinterpreted by future leaders, it is not sovereign. The only real defense is to design systems where even the possibility of surveillance is removed. Trust cannot do that. Architecture can. The coming collision, governments and cloud providers. For the first time in history, governments no longer need to build their own surveillance infrastructure. They can simply demand access to the systems built by big tech. Cloud providers have become the custodians of the world's intelligence, not human intelligence, but digital intelligence. They host personal data, corporate data, military systems, government records, AI models, identity systems, behavioural analytics. This is not a conspiracy. It's convenience combined with market dynamics. But it creates a profound vulnerability. The centralisation of the world's cognition in data centres. Where intelligence is centralised, access becomes negotiable. Not overtly, not publicly, but through legal pressures, secret orders, national security demands, partnerships, jurisdictional leverage, strategic cooperation. A centralised intelligence system is one political shift away from becoming a centralised compliance system. This is why the sovereign cloud narrative is so seductive and so dangerous. AWS and the illusion of sovereign AI. Recently, AWS appeared on a podcast promoting sovereign AI. On the surface, this sounds encouraging. Maybe big tech finally understands the need for autonomy and privacy. But as they explained their meaning of sovereignty, it became clear that the entire concept was built on two ideas. 1, trust your provider, and 2, use encryption. That's it. That's the pitch. Sovereignty is their framing. You're sovereign as long as you trust us. This is not sovereignty. This is marketing. Encryption is useful, but encryption does not protect you. If someone else controls the machine that encrypts and decrypts your information, a cloud provider, no matter how reputable, has physical access, administrative access, infrastructure control, government obligations, audit mechanisms, hardware-level privileges. A normal person cannot verify any of these layers. Trust becomes the entire foundation, and trust is not a security model. The question AWS could not answer, and likely cannot answer, is this: how can an ordinary person verify that their sovereign AI isn't being monitored, logged, or inspected by the provider or by a government order? The answer is simple: they can't. Unless the model runs locally, unless the compute is yours, unless the data never leaves your device, you are not sovereign. You are dependent. Dependence is not autonomy. Encryption is not sovereignty. Trust is not control. Self-custody is sovereignty. Verifiability is sovereignty. Locality is sovereignty. Sovereignty means even if you wanted to monitor me, you couldn't. A cloud provider can never offer that, not because they don't want to, but because the architecture forbids it. Why cloud-based sovereignty is impossible. Here is the core contradiction. You cannot have sovereignty or infrastructure you do not control. You cannot have privacy on systems you cannot audit. You cannot have autonomy without the ability to verify. You cannot have sovereign AI in a building you do not own, on hardware you cannot inspect, running processes you cannot see, subject to laws you did not write, operate by people you do not employ, with obligations you do not control. Cloud sovereignty is as extraordinary as cloud self-custody. It is the same paradox as trustlessness. Sovereignty is binary. You either have it or you don't. Anything that requires trust is not sovereignty. It is a dependency dressed up in reassuring language. The future, the cloud, is quietly building. If we continue down the path of cloud-based AI dominance, we end up with a world where the most powerful intelligence systems are owned by a handful of corporations. Governments can pressure those corporations for access. Individuals must trust entities they cannot verify. Psychological inference becomes centralized. Behavioral prediction becomes commodified. Compliance becomes automated. Autonomy becomes optional. This is not a hypothetical. It is the path we are on. And the scariest part, it will all feel normal. People won't wake up one morning and discover that their thoughts are monitored. They will simply use tools that seem helpful, tools that quietly learn more about them than any other human could, until one day freedom has quietly redefined itself, not as autonomy, but as a permitted behavior. Unless we build something different, unless we build sovereign AI, unless we build systems that return intelligence to the individual, unless we build architectures that do not require trust, but instead eliminate its necessity. Because trust is cheap, architecture is truth. And in the next chapter, we'll explore what that architecture actually looks like and why it is the only realistic alternative to an increasingly centralized future. Part 4. Sovereign AI and the future we must build. If the story so far has felt dark, it's because we've been tracing the natural path of centralized intelligence, a path shaped by incentives, infrastructure, and the quiet drift of human systems towards control. But this chapter is different. This chapter is about the fork in the road, the place where we decide what future we actually want. Because the truth is, surveillance is not inevitable, it's architectural, and architecture can be changed. We stand at the beginning of the single biggest platform shift since the birth of the internet. Not a shift in devices or apps or in interfaces, but a shift in where intelligence lives. For decades, intelligence lived on servers, in data centers, inside proprietary systems owned by corporations and monitored or monitorable by governments. The cloud became the temple. We became the worshippers. But what if the next era of AI rejects that model entirely? What if the future doesn't belong to centralized intelligence, but to sovereign intelligence? Intelligence that lives with the individual, not above them. This is not just a technological shift, it's a civilizational one. What sovereignty actually means and why everyone gets it wrong. Sovereignty is one of those words that gets thrown around so casually that it's lost almost all meaning. Corporations use it to sound responsible. Politicians use it to sound powerful. Tech companies use it to sound trustworthy. But the real definition is simple. Sovereignty means that you control the system and no one else can override that control. Not mostly, not in practice, not as long as everyone behaves. True sovereignty is binary. You either have it or you don't. If someone else can see your data or access your intelligence or override your decisions or encrypt or decrypt your information or subpoena your interactions or shut down your tools or manipulate your context or twist your identity, then you are not sovereign. Trust does not create sovereignty. Promises do not create sovereignty. Encryption alone does not create sovereignty. Compliance certifications do not create sovereignty. Brand friendliness certainly does not create sovereignty. Sovereignty requires locality, verifiability, independence, self-custody, user-controlled compute, architectural guarantees. Anything else is dependency sold as empowerment. Why locality is the foundation of freedom. There is a simple truth that every digital system eventually rediscovers. If your data leaves your device, someone else owns it. And if someone else owns the infrastructure that processes your intelligence, then someone else owns your intelligence itself, or at least can access it, control it, or shape it. Locality solves this. Local AI, the model running directly on your hardware, means no logs, no interception, no retention, no third-party access, no cloud dependencies, no silent data sharing, no forced updates, no moderation pipeline, no algorithmic profiling. When intelligence is local, sovereignty becomes practical, not conceptual. The device becomes the boundary. The boundary becomes the defense. The defense becomes the freedom. This isn't just a technical preference, it's a philosophical stance. Intelligence should live with the individual because the individual is the smallest sovereign unit of a free society. When intelligence is centralized, freedom becomes conditional. When intelligence is local, freedom becomes native. The architecture of sovereign AI. Sovereign AI requires a complete rethink of where computation happens. Here's what the architecture looks like in principle. 1. Local inference. The model runs on your device, not on a server, not in a data center, not behind a corporate interface. This ensures your queries never leave the device. 2. Zero data extraction. There is no telemetry, no analytics, no behavioral reporting. The system does not log your thoughts or conversations. 3. Verifiability over trust. The system must be designed so that even if the creators wanted to see your data, they couldn't. Not because they're good people, but because the architecture makes it impossible. 4. On-device encryption for storage. Any local data, if the user opts to save anything, is encrypted and remains under their key. 5. Optionality instead of default retention. Retention of history is optional, visible, and local only. 6. No backdoors, no hidden channels. Sovereignty means there cannot be a secret path for monitoring, not through the cloud, not through analytics, not through model update servers. 7. Compute that belongs to the user. If the intelligence lives on your device, then the infrastructure belongs to you, not the provider. This is the same logic that makes self-custody in Bitcoin so powerful. If somebody else holds the keys, the coins aren't yours. If someone else holds the compute, the intelligence isn't yours. Privacy is not a preference, it's a prerequisite for autonomy. Big tech treats privacy like a setting. Governments treat it like a concession. Apps treat it like a marketing bullet point. But privacy is not a feature. Privacy is the boundary that makes autonomy possible. Without privacy, you cannot form an independent identity. Without privacy, you cannot explore ideas safely. Without privacy, you cannot dissent. Without privacy, you cannot grow. Without privacy, you cannot think freely. Without privacy, you cannot negotiate your inner world without external pressures. Privacy is the oxygen of the mind. Take it away and thinking becomes performance, a performance shaped by the fear of how it might be interpreted. Centralized AI erodes privacy not through malevolence, but through design. It is the architecture itself that breaks autonomy. Only local first intelligence restores it. The ethical stakes, a world of permissioned minds. If we continue down the centralized AI path, we end up in a world where every thought we externalize passes through a corporate filter. Every question we ask becomes part of a behavioral model. Every idea we explore becomes classified. Every emotional pattern is logged. Every political lean is detected. Every vulnerability becomes a data point. Every connection becomes graphable. Every cognitive weakness becomes an opportunity for influence. Every person becomes readable by systems they cannot read back. This is not science fiction. This is already happening quietly through the metadata and inference pipelines of cloud-based AI models. What happens when this becomes the default? When using AI becomes synonymous with being monitored by AI? What happens when entire populations outsource thinking to systems that learn from their thinking, shape their thinking, and silently nudge their thinking? That is the danger. Not dystopian robots, but permissioned cognition. A world where intelligence is centralized becomes a world where thought is centralized. And a world where thought is centralized becomes a world where obedience is easy to enforce and dissent becomes a glitch. The alternative, a civilization built on local intelligence. Now imagine a different world, one where intelligence lives locally on billions of devices. No provider can monitor what you think. No government can demand access to your cognition. No corporation can build a profile of your emotional patterns. No cloud systems owns your behavioral history. No algorithm can control your self-awareness trajectory. No central server acts as a gatekeeper to your autonomy. Imagine a world where every individual has a private personal intelligence, a companion, a tool, an amplifier of thought that belongs only to them. A world where intelligence is not harvested, but inhabited. A world where privacy isn't a checkbox, but a guarantee. A world where sovereignty is not symbolic, but structural. This is not utopian. This is architectural. It is a simple choice of where the computation happens. Do we want to outsource our minds to the cloud, or do we want to carry them in our pockets? The answer defines the next century. Why sovereign AI must be built now, not later. You cannot retrofit sovereignty onto a system designed for surveillance. You cannot add autonomy onto a platform built for data extraction. You cannot patch trustlessness onto a model that relies on trust. You cannot decentralize an architecture designed for centralization. If sovereign AI does not appear now, in the early years of the AI boom, the window closes. Because infrastructure hardens, norms crystallize, dependencies deepen, regulation cements existing power structures, consumer expectations narrow, markets consolidate. And once centralization becomes the default, sovereignty becomes the fringe. This is the moment, the small opening in time, where a different future is still possible. And this is where Whisper enters the story. At some point in the last few years, something became obvious. The world was drifting towards a model of AI that demanded trust, but did not deserve it. Every company promised privacy. Every provider promised security. Every platform promised protection. Meanwhile, everything was moving to the cloud. Everything was being logged. Everything was being analyzed. Everything was being retained. So the question emerged, Why not put the intelligence on the device? Why not build an AI that no one, not even us, can see into? Why not give people self-custody of their intelligence? That question became a project. The project became a mission. The mission became 𝐬𝐴. Not as a product, not as a brand, not as another app competing for attention, but as a demonstration AI can serve you without surveilling you. 𝐬𝐴 is simply one expression of a larger movement, a movement towards private, local first, sovereign intelligence, a movement that says you shouldn't have to trust anyone with your mind, not the government, not tech companies, not us, not anyone. Your intelligence should belong to you, your thoughts should remain yours, your freedom should be non-negotiable. This isn't about being anti-cloud, it's about being pro-human. The choice before us, surveillance or sovereignty. Two futures stand before us, and only one of them leaves room for freedom. Future 1, surveillance AI. Intelligence lives in the cloud. Behavior is continuously analyzed. Inference becomes political. Psychological profiles become commodities. Privacy becomes a luxury. Sovereignty becomes a memory. Autonomy becomes permissioned. Future 2, sovereign AI. Intelligence lives on the device. Privacy is the default. Behavior remains yours. Thought becomes unmonitored. Identity becomes self-determined. Autonomy becomes the baseline. Freedom becomes structural. These futures are mutually exclusive. You cannot have both. You must choose one. And the world will choose. Through the architecture it builds, the systems it adopts, the technologies it celebrates, and the freedom it demands. Sovereignty is not a dream. It is a decision, a design choice, a commitment to a certain kind of civilization. And the sooner we make that choice, the better the next century will be. Final words. The future is personal. Every technological revolution produces a deeper philosophical one. AI is not just transforming work, creativity, or communication. It is transforming the human relationship with thought itself. And that means the question is no longer, what can AI do? The real question is, what does AI belong to? The real question is, who does AI belong to? If the answer is corporations or governments, then the future of intelligence will look like the past century of surveillance, but exponentially more powerful. If the answer is individuals, then AI becomes the greatest amplifier of autonomy humanity has ever created. We have the chance right now to build the most private, personal, empowering intelligence system ever imagined. A system that belongs to the person, not the platform. A system that sees you, but does not watch you. A system that helps you think, but does not harvest your thoughts. A system that amplifies your mind, but does not map it for others. A sovereign AI. An intelligence that is yours, fully, irrevocably, and forever. The world will move quickly. The infrastructure will solidify. The norms will be set. But if we build the right foundations now, we can ensure that the next era of AI is not an era of surveillance, but an era of sovereignty. Right, that was it. That was a bit of a long one, so thanks for still sticking around. I'll let you just absorb that. And it gives you something to think about. But if you want to follow this journey and these essays, the philosophy and the push towards sovereign AI, please do subscribe to the channel. And please feel free to check out what we're building with 𝐬𝐴. There's a lot more to come, and thanks for watching. I'll look forward to catching you on the next one. Lots of love. Take care.